people don't know what they want until they see it. And so if you're creating what you want and you're doing it your own way and you're like removing outside influences and ideas and things like that, chances are you're going to make something pretty unique. You're going to make something that's reflective of you, right? Like that's the only thing in the whole equation that is somewhat unique, is each person as an individual.
Welcome to the MiiR X Podcast,
a show that dives deep into the untold stories and untapped brilliance of business leaders, creators, and change makers who are shaping the world around us. I'm Brian Pape.
And I'm Rebecca Pape, and we're the co-founders of MiiR. And today, we're thrilled to introduce a guest who, through his lens, brings a fresh perspective to every frame he captures. A master of visual storytelling, joining us on the show is none other than our friend and the exceptionally talented John Keatley.
We had John at MiiR X Summit this fall, and he brought a lot of incredible stories from his past, and we're so excited to dive deeper into some of the stories and experiences he has had over his incredible career.
Okay, tell us, do you remember the first photo you ever took?
I remember probably like the first roll of film I ever took, and that was in high school. I had a photography class and we did like optical illusions. So people, people on a hillside in the far distance, like sitting on someone's, all the typical stuff you always do. You're learning about photography. I was not at all interested in photography at the time. It was just a class. It was more fun than other classes, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm interested in it. And it was just something I did. So I remember I couldn't say the exact picture, but I remember that first roll. I remember the roll of film I took in to be developed when I first decided I was going to be a photographer. That was like, I was in college and it was, we broke into like some golf courses at night and rode longboards down the hills and, jumping off swings. It was pictures like that. And that was just taking pictures of friends to make memories. It wasn't even, again, like about photography. So I took that last roll of film in to get developed. And when I went back to pick it up, the lab manager, she came out and she said, "Did you take these pictures?" And she walked through them with me. She said, "You have a really good eye. You would be really great at this." And I was like, "What does that even mean?" And the words that I think made the most impact was, aside from her encouragement, which did mean a lot to me, she said, "You can make a living taking pictures as a photographer. Like that's an actual thing." And so that was it. I was like, that's what I'm going to do. Because I was in the middle of school. I was in a software internship in a marketing department. I was studying business. And the one question I was asking myself is, what am I going to do with my life? Like I was freaking out. I felt like I had to know, which I didn't, but I felt like I had to know what I was going to do and make a decision. And so I was looking for something to do. And I knew that I wanted to be in control of something. So I knew like a 9-to-5 was not what I wanted, but that's what everyone kept telling me. You got to put in your time, climb the ladder. So that's probably the closest I could get to like a meaningful first photograph kind of thing. Cause it was never like I picked it up and I fell in love, or I took this picture and that was it kind of thing. It was a little more drawn out than that.
Did you always have support from your family, Nichelle, your wife, and your parents included? Or was there ever any hesitation or pushback or a suggestion that maybe you go in another direction?
Yeah, I mean, my family is very supportive, but I think, so I'll say that to preface this next part, but when I was going to college, it was a small private university. It was certainly, I don't even know how I afforded it. I worked a lot in high school in my first year of college and somehow it worked out. So, we didn't have a ton of money and I was going to school and that's when I started taking pictures, was my sophomore year of college. And like I said earlier, it was just for memories. It wasn't anything to do with photography. So I went home back to California for Christmas break and I showed my parents these pictures I'd taken just to show them college life. But their response was like, "You cannot afford to be taking pictures and paying for developing. Like we've got to pay for school right now. Like all money goes to school. Like we can't afford this." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right. That makes sense." So I took that last roll of film in to get developed. And so blindly, this woman saying I was good at something and it was something that was fun and she thought I could do it and I could make a living at it. That was it. So I went home and said, "I'm going to be a photographer." So, like they have been always supportive, but I'm sure that wasn't a great thing to hear from my parents who were like, "We just told you cannot be spending money on this. And you're supposed to be studying computer science and business administration. So how does this exactly balance out?"
Yeah.
And then I do remember after college, I had so many weddings and jobs. My plan was to just finish those out and then I would start looking for work. And I remember for several years, people kept saying, "When are you going to get a real job?" And eventually I started saying like, I have a real job. I'm working on my own. And So I don't take that as like a lack of support. It just was like, it's such a nebulous, strange thing, especially back then. Maybe today people would have an easier time with it. But um, I think my family was very much like, when are you going to get a real job? Like, this is kind of crazy. So I know they're incredibly proud of me now. And yeah, but yeah, there always have been, maybe not in family, but there's always been some people like, you can't do this or you can't do that, or that's not going to work. But I've tried to never listen to that. So
Does that motivate you or
oh,
drive
for
you?
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest motivators is when someone says you can't do something.
100%.
Absolutely.
Totally. There's something, I don't know. Yeah. Same for me. When someone's like, you can't do that, it makes me want to do it even more.
Even if I don't want to do it, I'm like, well,
Totally.
now it's happening. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. You're like, look at me now.
Yeah. I don't know. It's probably not healthy, but like that is
No.
definitely a big driver for me.
How did you get into wedding photography? I mean, for me, wedding videography was natural because it paid really well. So I was like, well, this makes sense. You know, I was kind of a slave to the dollar.
Yeah. I mean, I once I decided I was going to be a photographer, I just threw myself in completely. I had, I think, still like a year or two of school. And so I just, read the couple magazines I could find. I talked to anyone I could find who had a camera. I, showed up at, I had some friends that were being photographed for the university by a photographer from LA. And I just showed up at the shoot, which if someone did that to me, I'd be like, get the heck out of here. But he was super gracious and let me tag along. And so there was one guy on campus who was a photographer. He was working for a wedding studio, shooting weddings. And so for me, that was it. It was like someone that takes pictures and gets paid to do it. That's what I want to do. So I just got in. He introduced me, and a friend of mine from school who was also doing photography. We went down there, interviewed together, and we got jobs assisting shooting weddings on the weekends. And then they gave us free film and developing, just on our own, which was amazing. I started shooting like crazy at that point, and so that's how it got started. It was just any path I could find.
You got into more editorial stuff, portrait photography. I always love the story. I know you told it at MiiR X Summit, but getting out of wedding photography is such a lesson in psychology of pricing. How did you, for those who haven't heard the story, how did you get out of wedding photography, and what did you learn through that process?
So I had been photographing weddings for, I don't know, many years on my own at this point. And I was married. We had bought a house. I had a pretty good living doing it, shooting weddings. And I just got to the point where it was not what I wanted to do. I was not happy. I was pretty miserable. And I had started discovering this other type of photography, editorial advertising, where you could affect things. It wasn't just documenting life. It was, you could tell a story, you could mess with people, whatever it was. Like there was these opportunities that were really intriguing to me, but it's essentially, it's a new business. It's not like, there's no real pivot there. You have to create a whole new portfolio. You have to make an entirely new group of connections. You have to change the way you think about your work, all this kind of stuff. So I did start doing some stuff on my own on the side, but not like enough to, I mean, it's a scary thing when you have real bills in the real world to just like pivot that hard. And so I finally got to the point where the first thing I did was I was like, okay, I'm going to try to just go super high end. I'm going to like make a ton of money, and the money will make me enjoy it again, or be enough for me to, and that just didn't work. Like, that was not a good idea or approach. So with anything, I would argue, but, so then I had kind of like let my weddings, expire. I had shot the ones that I had on the books, and then I had 3 meetings scheduled, and I finally was like, okay, I'm done. Like I have to get out of this. Like I can't keep doing this. It had gotten I had hit the bottom. And so I had 3 meetings booked, and I wasn't like confident enough to just call them and cancel. I still felt like I needed money, and I wasn't sure where money was coming from in the future. So what I did was I should have done this a long time ago anyway, but I had 3 wedding packages. I had package A at the top, package B at the middle, and package C at the bottom. Package A at the top was the cheapest package. Package C at the bottom was the most expensive, and B was in the middle. Almost everyone, 95% of everyone booked package B. I generally only talked about package B. It just seemed like it was reasonable. Package C was very expensive, and that was just there because like, hey, who wouldn't want the money? But like, I kind of didn't believe anyone would actually buy it. And so I always talked about B. And so when I had 3 meetings left, and so I said, all right, I'll do these meetings. And so I redid my whole like pitch and my marketing and my brochures and stuff. And so I flipped it. I put package C at the top. I probably changed it to package A. And then I kept B in the middle and I put A at the bottom. And I decided I was only going to talk about the new package A, which is now the most expensive. And then I also decided, because I was kind of like, I kind of didn't really want to get these weddings. And I also was like, kind of needed money. It's funny. This was like so backwards. I was actually being confident for the first time ever is basically what was happening. But not intentionally. And so I doubled the prices of all the packages. So the most expensive one was $7,500. Now it was $15,000 and so on for all of them. So the next 3 people came in. I only showed the products from the most expensive one. I just talked about those. And I had an air about me of like, kind of like, I hope you don't even pick these. I hope you don't hire me, because I don't want to do this anymore. So I booked all 3. They all picked the $15,000 package. And that was what got me through. That's what helped me transition. I did not take any more meetings after that. Thankfully, I was smart enough to not get greedy and be like, I should keep going. But I booked all 3. I did them. And that money was a huge help, like transitioning into this new business, essentially. But it was, as Brian said, for me, it was a lesson that I think about frequently of just nothing changed. I wasn't a different person. I wasn't a different photographer. I didn't even have different pictures or experiences. It was all the same. The only thing that changed was my confidence or belief in my presentation. And, I had been doing this for 8, 9, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years at the time. And not a single person had ever purchased my most expensive package, even when it was half the price of the one that I just sold 3 times in a row. So, it is a good lesson in confidence and presentation for sure.
Do you think that gave you confidence going into some of the editorial pitches or pitches for, some of the celebrity portrait photographers that you have photographed?
I'm sure a little bit. I think that I've always had this kind of crazy optimism and just belief. Sometimes it's been ignorance, but I always just believe. I'll call up someone and just like in hindsight, there's several people where I've reached out to, and I think back, I'm like, you had no business reaching out to that person or whoever it was, and I just what could go wrong? I'd call them or email them, and they're like, yeah, sure, let's do that or whatever. And so I just always am kind of scrappy like that. I'll just, like I said, I'll show up at a photo shoot when I want to meet a photographer. I didn't know better. It's really rude and inconsiderate and like just not a good idea for many reasons. But I would just show up at a shoot and be like, can you teach me something? Can I learn something? Can I tag along? And I think, the big thing from that is just it pays to be curious and it pays to mess around and find out, right? Like if you don't mess around, you're not going to find out. So I think I was just more, to answer your question, I think I was just really excited about that type of photography and I just wanted to do it. I do remember having fear though, if I'm being in full transparency, when Nichelle and I were dating or got married, we would go to like the grocery store sometimes, and back when they had like huge magazine racks, and I would just go stare at the magazines and I would just be like, I could have done it. And I remember one time we went in and Nichelle just kind of stopped and she looks at me and she's like, are you just going to go look at the magazines and get depressed? I was like, that kind of like put it in perspective for me. I didn't even realize I was doing it. And I realized at that point, like, I'm just in this cycle and I'm not doing anything about it. In my head, I'm like, I'm not ready yet. I don't have enough to show. And so, but if you don't start somewhere, like it's never going to happen. And so one day, I think I probably blacked out. I just remember being aware that I was on the phone and I was like, who am I calling? I had called like Seattle Met, a local magazine here in Seattle. And next thing I know, I'm on the phone with the art director. And I was just like, hey, I'm a photographer. I really love your work. My dream is to shoot with you guys. And they're like, why don't you come down tomorrow? Let's meet. And that's how that started. So, sometimes I think like it's not always easy is my point, but you just gotta like do whatever, pick up the phone, write that email, show up, whatever it takes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a portrait or a photo that you've taken that you think might have like triggered all the other portrait photographs? Like stepping back for folks who may not be familiar with you, you've photographed some incredible people around the world. a lot of billionaires, a lot of famous people, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Annie Leibovitz asked for you to photograph her, which is also a great story. But do you remember like the moment throughout your career where like that led to some of those, photographing Howard Schultz or whoever it may have been?
Maybe, I don't know if this answers the question exactly, but I remember probably around the Keatley shirt time, when I was getting interested in editorial photography, I was still shooting film, and I had a friend who was a little bit younger than me, but he was like a super creative guy. He was making music, and he was really into comedy. And I don't know if you remember Tom Green. He had like a MTV or HBO show,
like the Tom Green show.
Yeah, the Tom Green show. So my friend Darius was working with him, making content and videos, and he had this. He had Darius's grandpa. His name was Albert. He was just one of the most fascinating people. And Darius would make videos about him, and so he would just kind of. He had a wife, and it's been so long. I don't want to tell too many stories because I'm probably getting some of it wrong. But he would just like get up one day and leave and be gone for several months, and no one knew where he was. And he'd come home eventually. He just like traveled the world or went somewhere. He would like cook an eggplant on like the open flame on their stove, and then he would like scoop it out and eat it. And then, Darius would be like, "How do you clean it up?" He's like, "Oh, someone else will clean it up." He just kind of leaves or whatever. So I remember like really being into these videos that Darius was making. And so I asked if I could photograph his grandpa. So I made the series of portraits of his grandpa, Albert. And they like blew my mind. It was like looking at my favorite photographer's work. I almost was like, how did I do this? But I remember thinking like, I can do this. Like I just did it. And it was this like secret formula or recipe that I didn't know. And it happened for me. And so that to me was like, that gave me so much confidence to move forward and realize, okay, I just made something that reflects the things I've been looking at and dreaming about and wondering how they did this or that or whatever. So that was a huge, maybe the most pivotal image or images that I ever made, just because of the time that I made them and where I was at and what they led to.
Yeah, that's fascinating. For us, I think 2014, 15, like when Patagonia reached out and then we partnered with them, it kind of like cemented this like seriousness of the brand that someone took us seriously,
Yeah.
And then it kind of snowballed.
And yeah, how did you get Patagonia? I mean, was that kind of like a crazy ask, or how was that? I mean,
no, they emailed us, which is, which is.
I know, it's not even a good story.
It's not even a good story. It's like Paul from Patagonia emailed, and I was like checking to make sure it was like spelled right, like not like some fake Patagonia. But it's funny. It's one of those things that like all the little things before that lead up to potentially working with someone who's like-minded or shares some of the same values that you have. And it was the design. If we had ugly design, design was a very foundational principle for us. Kind of this idea of generosity and responsibility was foundational for us. Yeah. We had become a certified B Corp. So I think all those things attracted them to us. And then, that's where like the luck part kind of shows up, where they just happen to email and we emailed back. And, there's been so many fun stories within that relationship. But same thing with like Blue Bottle Coffee. It's a kind of like right place, right time, right? Where we did some things right, but we also got lucky in the sense that single-use plastics is fading. I mean, there's a lot now of single-use plastics, but it's kind of like in vogue to not use that. And so that is like a macro trend that we just got lucky. It's not like I was sitting in 2009 going, you know what? I think reusability is going to be a huge thing in the future. It was more like a personal belief that it was bad and wanting to create something beautiful. And then it kind of fell into place.
It's funny how easy, or not easy, but it's funny how, I mean, you or I or people create things that you believe in, like that. You can get that part down. But then there's this doubt or wonder, like, will anyone else value this, or will anyone else see it? And it's funny how that can just become such a holdup. And it takes, again, it shouldn't even take validation from someone else to believe whether or not your idea was right. Even if your business numbers gets off the ground, if you did it the way you believed in and you stand behind it, like that should be enough. But we need like that someone else to validate it for us. And I was thinking about when you were just talking about that, like even you were asking about confidence to go after something. And I'm just realizing even through this conversation, it's a good reminder how much of it is just putting your energy into something and just believing in it. Like the Annie Leibovitz portrait or the Anthony Hopkins portrait, those literally came. I'll say the Anthony Hopkins one. I was shooting an event. I was still like doing events and weddings and stuff. And I was just getting into like editorial portraits at the time. And I was at an event at our university that I was shooting, and I was just talking to some people I knew. And someone said, "Oh, did you hear Anthony Hopkins is coming to town tomorrow for the Seattle International Film Festival?" And he was my favorite actor at the time. And I just like, my mind went to another place. And I just said, "Oh my gosh, I would love to photograph him." And everyone's like, "Oh, that would be awesome, wouldn't it?" You know, and no one believing that that would even be an option for this kid photographing an event. And I'm not kidding. 30 seconds later, my cell phone rang, and I stepped out and I took it. And it was the art director from Seattle Met, and he said, "Hey, I know this is crazy last minute, but are you available tomorrow to photograph Anthony Hopkins?" And that I can't
Did
even
you feel like you had been punked? Were you like, what is this?
No, I was just like, I lost my mind. I was through the roof. That's happened to me so many times. I can't even, it's not just like that one time. That's happened many times.
There's something about, I feel like there's something there about like manifesting the energy and like where you go. And Albert Einstein has this quote about like matching the energy that you want to receive, because he talks about like energy, that's all there is in the world. And it's either like given or receiving. And if you don't have where you want, you have to like match the frequency of your energy to what you want.
Totally.
And he talks about, it's not just like luck, it's like physics, and there's a whole lot of like woo-woo stuff there. But similarly, we've had instances where like, gosh, it'd be really great if we worked with fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And a month later, fill in the blank emails us and is like, "We'd like to work with you," you know? And so it's like, you kind of have to put yourself out into the world.
That's actually our sales strategy. No, just kidding. It's not, but it's a cherry on top, you know? Okay. So you get the call and you're like, yes, I will be there.
Yeah. And I mean, not qualified, but you know, you show up and you do it. And that's also so much of all the big breaks I've had in my life is, you know, rarely are you qualified, which goes back again to like confidence. You just got to like show up and do your best and prepare and be ready. And it's like, but I talk to people all the time that don't want to do something because they're not qualified or they're not ready. That was me, right? When I was looking at magazines, like just wasting time. No one's ever ready for anything until you do it. And then you realize, oh, you know, I'm learning that lesson constantly, over and over again in different ways. So yeah.
Amazing. How did the Annie Leibovitz come about?
It was the same kind of thing. I was photographing John Waters, who he wrote Hairspray. And then somehow, I think just because I was a photographer, I think the publicist, I don't know if she was even name dropping or something, but she said to me, "Oh, and I'm working with Annie Leibovitz on a new book she has coming out," thinking that I would find that interesting. And I just said, "Oh my gosh, I would love to make a portrait of Annie Leibovitz." And again, she laughed and she's like, "Oh, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? But I don't think she sits for anyone." And that was it. And then I think 2-3 months later, just out of the blue, I get an email from the publicist and it just said, "Would you be interested in photographing Annie Leibovitz?" And I said, "Yes." And it was just, you know, again, like putting it out there, I think is really the only reason I got that. It's because I said that. I think if I didn't say it out loud, it wouldn't happen. Maybe if I said it in my head, it could have still, but I really believe just, you know, putting it out there. I was so nervous for that. I was probably more nervous than I had ever been for a portrait that I had taken. I went through a whole just like range of emotions going into it, my first thought was I was going to take this Annie Leibovitz type portrait of her, thinking that was like so clever. It would have been such a stupid thing to try. And then I thought, oh, I'm going to go up on the roof because I knew we were going to be at this hotel. I was like, we're going to go on the roof and do something dramatic. And thankfully, I'd done enough celebrity work at the time, and I knew enough to know, okay, what's reality? We're going to have 5 to 10 minutes. We're going to be in a hotel room. I'm not interested in like documenting or literal things. I'm interested in like feelings and emotions and relationships and creating stories. And so I started backing off and trying to, rather than looking at it as a constraint, trying to this is kind of where I developed this idea that I often work from is I'm going to take all the constraints and I'm going to pretend like I wanted them. So I'm going to try to build, I'm going to try to lean into these instead of like treating them as excuses. I'm going to make something intentional. And so what can I do in this case? I'm not going to show her in the lobby of a hotel. I'm not going to give context. It's like, oh yeah, he just had a quick pass by. I want to look her in the eyes. I want to be intimate and close, and I want to get something emotional from her. And so I'm going to strip away environment. I'm going to do something as simple but intimate as possible. And so that's how this came about. And that was, again, like, it was an experiment, but a huge lesson for me in that whole process. But then in terms of, to answer your question, the day of, I got there and I set up early, and then she was supposed to come in and we were going to do the shoot. And then she was going to do an interview after. And then she was a little late. And then I got a call and they said she's running half an hour late. And then they said, would you mind if, when she gets here half an hour late, could she start with the interview and then do the portrait? So that meant I was like an hour and a half with nothing to do. And I went out into the hallway and I almost threw up. Like, I almost lost it. I was so queasy because I had just been keeping myself busy, setting up and getting ready and like just being, busy. And all of a sudden I just had to sit with these emotions and fears and expectations. And so that was really hard. But when she came in, she was so gracious. I had just gotten a digital medium format camera, which is pretty new at the time, and she didn't have one, surprisingly. And so she was really interested in the camera and was asking me questions about it. And we were talking about the camera. And then someone, I think the publicist, was like, "We got to go, guys." Like, and so she sat down, and she was really nervous, but she was really vulnerable and collaborative. And I still think to this day she gave me so much. She really. And that's why I think this picture is so interesting, because she allowed herself to be vulnerable. And, but I also think I maybe caught her off guard a little bit too, because I think she thought I was just this young kid that wasn't doing anything serious. And it was a really wonderful experience. I really enjoyed my time with her a lot. Brian, you talk about a lot that you reinforced for me even last year, is just, the phrase "find a way," right?
Totally.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of years, is just find a way. I mean, I used to kind of freak out or get emotional when things came up. Things always come up, right? I mean, another one we learned together was calm is contagious,
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And so staying calm and finding a way, there's always a way. And the more you talk to people who have found success in life, the more you realize none of the paths were paved with gold bricks. Like, everyone was told no and was told this is a dumb idea or you're going to fail or whatever. And the only reason they found success is because they found a way. And so I think
Totally.
just like remembering that and not letting those constraints get you down or send you off course is so key.
It's funny too, because once you hear that phrase, and I heard it years and years ago, and it with Lisa on our board, we distilled our values into practices because we want them to be things that you practice saying, you hear people saying, you practice doing. And now constantly, especially watching sports and athletics, it's almost like inevitable. Every game, the announcer says, so-and-so found a way to get to the end zone. So-and-so found a way to get the last strike. So-and-so found a way to land the triple axel, or, whatever the, move du jour is in ice skating. But whatever, and like, as soon as you're like tuned to it, you start to hear it more and more and more, especially in the context of like overcoming. And I think it's really powerful.
Yeah. I've noticed that a lot since you told me that. It is crazy. It's very common.
Oftentimes people are hiring you to take incredible photos, but then you're also trying to satisfy the client of what they want, but they're also paying you to do your craft. How do you balance that, or how do you navigate that?
It's tricky. I mean, it depends on the season. It's sometimes, if it's slower, it's easier to get pulled into the whole, what do I think they want kind of thing. But the idea that I try to live by is, people don't know what they want until they see it. And so if you're creating what you want, and you're doing it your own way, and you're like removing outside influences and ideas and things like that, chances are you're going to make something pretty unique. You're going to make something that's reflective of you, right? Like, that's the only thing in the whole equation that is somewhat unique, is each person as an individual. So if you can make something that truly satisfies yourself and like satisfies your curiosity, you're going to come away with something that's different. Not going to say every time you make something it's groundbreaking, but that's kind of like the North Star for staying focused on, how do I create something that's unique to me and that I'm going to enjoy? And at that point, when people see that, they're going to be drawn to that, because brands, clients, people are always looking for ways to differentiate. They don't want to look like every other brand. We have conversations all the time with clients on like, okay, we can't use these colors because these are our competitors' colors, or sometimes it's just micro things like that. But even as a whole, brands want to stand out. They want to look unique. And so that doesn't mean a lot of times things don't look the same. They do, but that's that scary thing is, okay, your brain tells you, don't create this thing that you want to create because no one will want it. You've never seen it anywhere. But that's going to be what makes it interesting, is the fact that no one's seen it anywhere. So you just have to keep trusting that. And if you go the other way and you make what you see brands using and what other people are doing, it's going to take you some time to catch up. You'll finally make it. By the time you do, first of all, that was 2 years ago. People have already moved on from that. That's old news. Second of all, you're creating not from a place of like passion or genuine interest. You're copying something. And so even if you did catch up time-wise or whatever and you made it, it's not going to be intriguing to anyone because it's just derivative. And it's going to be like, going to the restaurant where the chef read about, what people like or what's popular and tried to make something based off of that, as opposed to like actually, figuring out what intrigues them and what drives them and built in making something from that place. So that's how I try to balance it. It's not always easy, but I think it's important.
How do you make time for your personal projects?
I haven't always been super consistent about it. Some years are just super busy and you're just doing the work. And I remember 2 years ago, I had one of those years I was really busy. It was a great year. And a lot of the work I was doing though was not super creative. It was a little boring. And I remember we had a great financial year, but I remember in the summer, I had this one particular job back east. And I remember thinking to myself, this is not going to end well if you keep this up, because you're going to come out of a year or two with nothing to show. And it's going to take a long time to catch up. But we were saving up for something, and I was, I ended up just kind of sticking with it. And it inevitably, that's what happened. I got to this slow period and I had nothing to show. And so then you're like starting from scratch, so to speak. And so in that case, I had a lot of time, and I just got after it and started really diving in and making personal work. But the rhythm I'm trying to stay on right now is I'll have a job or two, and then I'll have, several weeks off. And so in those slow times, I'm trying to force myself to write and do research and compile notes. And I rarely get a chance to just stay in that place. I usually have to come back to it, but I try to just keep meticulous notes and make sure I'm using those downtimes so that when I do have a week or two that are open, I can jump on it and make something. And even like right now, this morning, I'm starting the editing process on something I shot like 6 weeks ago. So I can't always do it all in one thing, but I just think it's so important to stay consistent and try to do something, even if it's just a little bit, because I think sometimes myself and other artists, they get bogged down by the big picture and they think, oh, I don't have time to do it all right now, so I'm going to put it off. And it's like, you're never going to have time to do it all right now. You just have to do what you can.
Yeah. And is it fair to say that the personal projects, like the passion projects, the result is the purest expression of like who you, John Keatley, are as an artist, right?
Yeah.
So that's the best way to communicate, convey to potential customers or, for future business, like who you are, what you're about, what you're capable of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, early on, I learned that lesson. When you're doing commercial work for clients, you're working for a client and your job is to help them achieve their goals. Their goals are not going to be aligned with your goals. You're getting paid for it. And those jobs, to be honest, like I really do love them. I love, even when it's a job, even if it's not necessarily like totally based off of my vision, I love collaborating with the people I get to work with. And, I still love the problem solving and just creating. But if you don't have personal work going on for yourself, you're going to try to like force those jobs to be your personal work. And you're going to get so hung up on the things that you have to cut or let go or kill or change. And you just can't live or work like that. Like it's off-putting. It's not realistic. So yeah, you have to do your best and speak up when you can and try to make the best product you can for the clients with their goals in mind, not your own goals. Like this has to be successful for the client. And then you can do whatever you want on your personal work. And that I just find it's terrifying when you start, because if you fail, there's so many, things that fall back on you. But you have to fail, first of all, and you have to take that time to create. And I've never have as much fun as I do when I'm shooting for myself. It's just, it's such a blast. And it takes a while to learn that.
Well, John, thanks for taking time with us today.
This was so fun. What a blast to get to catch up with you guys. I love this.
I know, this is great. We should do this more often. That's John Keatley, Seattle-based photographer and director. Follow him on Instagram at John Keatley. That's JohnKeatley to stay updated on his latest projects and creative endeavors, and a place to just enjoy his amazing photography. Thank you for tuning in to the MiiR X Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we'll continue to explore the stories and brilliance behind business leaders, creators, and changemakers that are shaping our world. Until next time.